Hello again, YouTube. This video we're going to talk about functions, or methods, depending on what you want to call them. I use the terms interchangeably, because that's just how it is with Java. So, I'm going to get rid of all this stuff within main that we can talk about. So, what's a method? What's a function? This is a function, right? It's static, which means that there's only one instance of it, ever. It's void, which means it doesn't return anything. That is, I can't say something equals main. I can't do that. There's nothing for main to return. It takes one argument, which is an array of strings. We'll talk about arrays in another video, but basically what this means is if you wanted, you could run this program within the command line, such as CMD or PowerShell, but otherwise you can run it normally. So let's talk about functions a little bit. Let's talk about writing a function. So this part of the function is the identifier, the name, so it's called main. The parentheses give you a list of possible parameters. The curly brackets show you the definition of the function itself. And this part up here, including the name, public, static, void, that's part of the signature of the function. So that's how we know the signature has attributes, right? The function has attributes. It's a public function, which means it can be accessed outside of this class being my app. And static, of course, is only a single instance of it. So let's make another function. Let's make a function called, I don't know, print. Now, you might be thinking, wait a moment, isn't there already a print function, print line? And yes, you'd be correct. But we're going to do it anyway. Why not? It's going to be void, and it's going to be static, and let's make it private. So private means it can't be accessed outside this class. You wouldn't believe it, but my T key was stuck. T key on my keyboard. Stuck. Anyway, so we have print. And print is not used yet, so we have to call print. Now what does print do? At the moment, nothing. Literally nothing. If we call this method, nothing will happen. So let's give it something it can do. So let's give it a string variable. I can accept that it can accept. Right? And now if I write so now we can mess around with this. So what is x? X is equal to whatever value we put in here, right? Or the value of whatever variable we put in here. If I had another variable called, if another variable of type string called name, then if I put variable name in there instead of writing it in quotations, x will be equal to whatever we put in here. So in either case, if we want, we can have it, we can route x to system.println. Says Robert. That's really compelling. Now, what if instead of just writing out the name once, it was a little bit more than that? Let's try putting a number here. Now, you'll see an error. The method print, the type my app, is not applicable for the argument string int. So what's the issue? Well, in the definition, in the signature of the function, we've only specified one possible argument, string argument, right? So if we want to specify that there are more possible arguments, we'd have to write int or some other variable. Now you can't name the variable number as number, so we'll call this n number of times. Now there is an issue. What if we want it to print for n number of times? What do we do then? That's where we'd want to introduce another construction, another structure, another code structure. We have this. We could introduce the concept of loops, but there's another concept I could show you. It's a little more advanced. It's recursion. You could use loops or recursion to solve problems which are iterative. That is, if you want to do something multiple times, it's an iterable problem. It's a problem that involves iteration. You can approach those problems either with recursion or with loops. Now, loops are probably a little easier to understand, so let's do that. So we'll create a counter variable for counting the number of iterations that have passed. And we'll say while count is less than n. Then we'll open curly bracket, close the curly bracket. So while the count is less than n, this count equals count plus 1. So what this says is while the counter variable showing the number of iterations, while this variable is less than n, print the predefined string and then add 1 to the variable count. So how this will work, in effect, is that we'll have it printed add. Is it still less than n? Yes. Print again. Add. They'll keep going. They'll keep jumping up to the top here when it gets to this part until no longer meets this condition, and then it'll go past. Off in the blue. So, by the way, this is a comment. When you do the double slash, that's a comment. It has no impact on the code. It's just a message to you, the program. Let's run this. Robert. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 times. So we printed out the name Robert 5 times. Very cool. If it helps you visualize it, you can make use of something called debugging, bug statement. I'm going to create a break. So breakpoints are useful for finding bugs. We're going to press debug this time, debug my app instead of just run. Sure, let's switch. Now it's going to open up this debug menu. And it's kind of nice because it shows you, it stops the program from running when it hits the breakpoint, which we just clicked on. Stops the program from running, and it tells you the values of each variable. So equal to Robert, and right now is equal to 5. But count is equal to 0. So when debugging, we can actually go ahead, press zoom. So this allows us to step through the code, right? Now count is equal to 1. No, we want to press step over. We get to watch the code execute. See it on the side, see how the value is updating. I'm pressing step over. You can see it's also printing down here. It's like watching the program run in slow motion. And then, look at that, it got out of the loop because count was equal to 5. Now we're down here, off in the blue yonder. I bet if I press F6 or step over again, the program will end soon. Look at that. Yeah. So notice when this function, when it went over to here, when the function ended up right here, green line ended up here. So function quit. This function ran out of things to do. Went over here and it's like, where do I go? Let's snap back to our origin point. There's our origin point here. And now it's down here because there's nothing else for main to do either. You know, if I had another function for main, I've done that. But I guarantee if I press this again, it's going to end. Lo and behold, it has ended. It says terminated. So that's debugging. That's the really nifty thing called debugging. Incidentally, the word debugging comes from when Grace Hopper, a pioneer of computer science, found an actual bug in her computer. So like one of these huge computers that took up several rooms, size of a couple buildings. She found an actual bug, like inside of the computer, and it was causing errors. Anyway, that's why it's called debugging. She literally debugs the computer. Anyway, toggle breakpoint. There we go. So now I've gotten rid of the breakpoint. So anyway, this is a loop, right? And it's counter controlled, meaning we have a variable. In this case, is literally called count. Keep track of where the loop is. Now, a counter controlled loop needs two things. It needs a variable to control, to keep track of the iterations, and it needs a statement that increases the number of iterations. And this is done with a while. Now, the conditions at the beginning, there's another kind of loop called do while. So let's get rid of that. So do while is a little different in syntax, in that do while will always execute once. You still need a counter variable, int count 0. And we're going to use this short form, which means add 1 to count. While count is less than n, or less than n, let's say less than n. So we can have it print x for such and such amount of time. So if we press now, run my app, 2 or 5, okay, seems normal. What if I make the number here 0? Let's see what happens. It still prints it once, right? Because as I let on, the difference between a do while and a regular while loop is that do while will always execute the body of the loop. That is the part between the curly brackets. It will always execute the content of the loop at least once. At least once. Anyway, I hope this was halfway informative. I'm going to show one more example here. Functions, because this was supposed to be about functions primarily. I'm going to show you how to do return types. And this is true of really anything. So I'm going to make string name, change name. So what might we infer about the function change name just without even having defined it? What can we infer about it? Well, we can infer a lot of things. For one, it takes a variable of type string as a parameter. So it has, in its arguments list, it has listed a variable of type string. And we also know that it returns a variable of type string right here. So let's Eclipse will actually be very nice for us, and we can press create method change name string. Let's try it just for the sake of it. And Eclipse guessed correctly that it would also be a static function. And it figured out the type, which is string, is the type of the input variable. Did not figure out what it should return. We'll figure that. We'll figure that out. So we'll have. So let's say result equals name dot. Let's say we're gonna replace one character. So replace the letter O with letter A, right? We'll do that. Now notice I used single quotes instead of double quotes like up here, because this method involves use of char. Char is a character. A car is a character. So string is actually made up of multiple characters. But in this case, the method replace allows you to change like individual characters with string. Let's replace with the word null with result, because if we return null, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change things in the way. So let's make it like this, right? And let's print out the new name as well. We'll do it 10 times. That'll be fun. So first it was Robert, and then we changed it. We changed the name and became Rabbert. What kind of name is Rabbert? Who knows? I don't judge. Let's make it 5 times instead of. So Robert becomes Rabbert. Rabbert. It's very funny. Hilarious. Change the name. This function turns a string. Return type is string. Name of the function is change name. Takes one argument. In this case, a variable of type string. And it's a private function, so you cannot access it outside of this class, my app. We can't access it outside it. It's static. It's only one instance of it. Next video, I think we'll talk about arrays, a little bit more about functions. Functions are extremely useful. Till then.